Okay, so imagine this. A powerful, anonymous message gets sent to a small group of early Christians who are right on the brink of falling apart. For centuries, the biblical letter we call Hebrews has basically been an unsolved case file. We have no idea who wrote it, we're not totally sure who it was for, and we don't have the full story on the crisis they were facing. So today, we're going to open up that case file and see what clues we can find. So the first and most important question you have to ask is right here. Who exactly were these Hebrews? I mean, ancient scribes are the ones who slapped that title on the letter, and for a really long time, nobody really questioned it. But when you start to dig a little deeper, yeah, the answer is definitely not what you think. In fact, that traditional idea isn't just a little bit wrong, it's a massive red herring that's been hiding the real danger this community was in all along. Okay, section 1. An anonymous, mysterious letter. This is the case of an unknown audience, so let's dive in. What we're dealing with here is a completely anonymous letter. It was ancient scribes, way later, who decided to call it To the Hebrews. The text itself? It gives us only one single cryptic clue, right at the very end. Those from Italy greet you. Not much to work with, is it? All right, section 2, decoding the secret audience. We're going to follow the clues. So if we ever want to figure out what was going so wrong for them, we have to figure out who they are first. And this is where the real detective work kicks in. We've got to look for the clues hidden right there in the text itself. Okay, so let's look at the traditional suspects versus what the evidence really tells us. For a long time, everyone just assumed, oh, it's called Hebrews, so it must be for Jewish Christians. And yeah, the letter talks a ton about the Old Testament and the temple sacrifices, so that seems to fit, right? But hold on a second. That evidence is kind of shaky when you really look at it. Gentile Christians, they read the Old Testament too. It was their Bible. And they also needed to know how all that sacrifice stuff connected to their new faith. But here's the real kicker. The author warns them about turning away from the living God. You know what that phrase usually meant back then? It was a warning against going back to pagan idols, not a warning about returning to Judaism. So the evidence doesn't point to just one group, but to a mixed community, both Jewish and Gentile believers, all in it together. Let's tick off the clues. First, the author mentions their foundational teaching, which included repentance from dead works. That's classic language for turning away from pagan idols. Plus, the author was definitely connected to the Apostle Paul's mission. And what was Paul's whole thing? Creating these mixed churches to show that this new faith was for everybody. And finally, the community itself. It wasn't just one type of person. They had people from different social classes. Some were well off enough to have property that got taken away. This was a really diverse bunch. So, section 3, a community in crisis. Now we get to the real danger. Okay, so now that we have a much better idea of who we're talking about, we can finally tackle the next big question in this mystery. What was going on? What was this urgent crisis they were facing? Well, the author gives us these 3 little windows into their history, which is super helpful. First, when they initially became believers, it was this really powerful experience, talk of signs and wonders, the whole deal. Second, they got really deep into the community. They learned new teachings, they had rituals like baptism. It really created this whole new identity for them. And third, and this is so important, they had already been through some really tough times. We're talking public shaming, harassment, people getting their property taken away. And they stood tall through it all. They were brave. So get this was not some weak, fragile group. They had already faced down serious opposition and didn't back down. So what happened? If they were so tough, what changed? Well, this quote right here from chapter 10 is basically the smoking gun in our case. The author says, "Do not abandon the assembling of yourselves together, as is the habit of some." People were just not showing up anymore. They were drifting away. Nobody was kicking them out. They were just choosing to stay home. And that's when you realize the real crisis wasn't some big new wave of persecution. It was something much quieter, something way more insidious. It was burnout. I mean, this is it right here, a slow failure of commitment. And you've got to think, this is an ancient problem, but it feels so modern, doesn't it? It's that deep down weariness you get when it just costs too much, socially, to keep believing. Okay, on to section 4, the author's survival playbook, a 3-part strategy. So you've got this community just running on fumes, totally exhausted. What does the author do? Well, he doesn't just yell at them. Instead, he lays out this absolutely brilliant 3-part strategy. It's like a survival playbook designed to pull them back from the edge. And his plan is actually pretty straightforward, built on 3 really powerful ideas. Step 1, despise shame. Step 2, show gratitude. And step 3, support each other. Okay, so strategy number 1, despise shame. This is all about tackling that external pressure head on. But how do you do that? Well, he tells them to completely reframe how they think about it. The harassment they're getting from their neighbors, that's not something to be embarrassed about. It's an honorable contest. He reminds them, hey, you guys were bold before. And then he points to these legendary heroes of faith, Abraham, Moses, even Jesus himself, and says, look, they all endured shame, but they did it for a much greater honor. It's like he's trying to build up their psychological defenses against all that social pressure. All right, the second strategy is, honestly, just pure genius. And to really get it, we need to understand a huge concept in their world called charis. We usually translate it as grace, but that doesn't even begin to cover it. See, charis was like the social glue of the entire Greco-Roman world. It had these 3 interconnected parts. First, there's the favor, the goodwill that a powerful person, a benefactor, shows you. Second, there's the gift, the actual tangible thing they give you. And third, and this is key, there's the gratitude, which wasn't just a feeling, it was the required response of loyalty you owed that benefactor. So what does the author do? He plugs right into that social logic that everyone understood. His message is basically this. Folks, God is your ultimate benefactor. He's your patron. And through Jesus, he has given you the most incredible gift imaginable. And if that's true, what's the only possible response? Loyalty, gratitude. To just walk away? That would be like publicly spitting in the face of the most generous patron in the universe. In their culture, that argument was a slam dunk. It was incredibly powerful. Okay, so for his final move, the author turns the focus inward. Strategy number 3 is all about supporting each other. He knew that one person can't hang on by themselves forever. You need a strong community. I mean, think about it. If you're getting all this negative pressure from the outside world every single day, you absolutely have to create your own positive environment on the inside. A place where you can encourage each other and fight back against all that hostility. All right, section 5. Why this still matters. An ancient struggle for today. So why are we even talking about this? Why does this ancient anonymous letter still feel so relevant? Well, it's because this isn't just some dusty first-century problem. It's a case study in a struggle that is absolutely timeless. It's about how to deal with social pressure. It's about spiritual burnout. It's about what happens when that initial excitement wears off and commitment starts to fade. Sound familiar? And ultimately, it leaves us with this huge, timeless question. When the pressure is really on, what is it that actually holds a community together? For this little group of ancient believers, the answer was a 3-part playbook. Change how you see shame, lean into a deep sense of gratitude, and support each other like your lives depend on it. And that's a question that's just as important for us to think about today as it was for them back then.